Good afternoon. Hi. It's very nice to be here and to share with you some of our story from Hotel Wonderland for the first time. I stand here before you as the artistic co-founder of the experience, but also as a newly recovered broken man. Because I had a dream, a big ambitious dream of creating something like this. And I invited people to join me on that dream. And when you do something like that, they'll look into your eyes and say, it's impossible. And you'll tell them, no, it's not. And they'll tell you, it'll fail. And you'll tell them, no, it won't. But then it will. Or it did. And you feel like you betrayed their trust, which you didn't. But it wears on you.
Hello everyone, I'm standing here as someone who believed in this vision from the very beginning. And I just want to get a bit of a read of the room. By show of hands, who here has just created something, is creating something right now, or is thinking about creating something? That's what I thought. Okay,
Right.
Now, keep your hand up if you think your idea yourself is quite ambitious by nature. Alright, interesting. Now, who here thinks that their ambitious idea, if it fails the goals that you have set for yourself, you will have failed yourself and failed the team that you work with? Okay, keep that thought locked into your mind. Now, we're here to share some reflections on a project that, by all definitions of its early metrics of success that we had set for ourselves, has failed. Hotel Wonderland had its last show about a year ago, and we learned a lot of things. There's many things that undoubtedly we'll still learn, but we think it's worth it to share some of the things that might be worth to you, especially people who are about to create something.
To guide us through this presentation and kind of focus on a few lessons learned, we distilled these specific lessons. The first is talking about how to build a team that buys into the dream.
The second is about how you can keep an ensemble of artists and performers artistically engaged, while at the same time accounting for the need of creating more than 36 hours of content.
The third will briefly touch upon how to set up your tech for a big experience like this.
And lastly, we're going to talk about something that undoubtedly you'll all agree with, which is that the audience is always right.
Alright, build a team that buys into the dream. So when we set out to do this, we treaded into a landscape that was completely new. In the Netherlands, nothing like this had ever been done before, and the cultural landscape didn't really lend itself to finance an idea like this. So in order to convince investors of our idea, which wasn't fully formed at all, we created a beautiful hardcover printed book, an investor book. We printed 50 copies of them and sent them out to everybody we knew with a little bit of spare cash. We tried to explain the immersive landscape and where we were standing in relation to, let's say, Sleep No More, a Meow Wolf, Burning Man, Secret Cinema, and a bunch of Dutch references. What ended up happening, because I will just skip way to the end, because as you know, Hotel Wonderland didn't last very long, and it did fail, and actually everybody lost money. But the beautiful thing is, these investors weren't theater investors, they weren't entertainment investors. They were private investors that bought into our biggest dream, the dream of creating a special place where for people to experience a very special kind of sensitive, emotional transformation that we'll touch upon later. And because they bought into the dream rather than the product, our relationship with these people is still very good. They lost money, but we didn't lose that dream.
Now, how do you sell a dream to artists? How do you get artists of very different disciplines to understand the common vocabulary? This is a difficult undertaking, and to actually put it into practice so that you have different artistic, immersive installations who then, that works collaboratively with performers, for example, musicians. There needs to be some sort of poetic DNA.
Yeah, so just to explain briefly what it was that we created, it was a co-creative experience. I didn't set out to tell a specific story. I didn't set out to create a specific world in a specific IP. We started with the idea of creating a space, an experience, for people to experience a certain type of emotional transformation based around intuition and connectedness. And this is where we started, very vague, abstract starting point. In order to get artists to join our journey, we created several documents around this call for artists. One of them was our aesthetic guidelines. We took references from, let's say, from the zeitgeist, and kind of juxtaposed these references to what we were trying to do. We weren't saying, build this, but we were saying, build something in this poetic realm. Some text, some visuals, and a lot of calls. This call for artists went out into the world and came back with over 160 applications of interactive artworks, scene settings, audio, all these different artists that wanted to contribute to this idea of ours.
Right. Love your scripts, but don't marry it. I'm just going to show you really quickly a script. This is what 36 hours of content looks like. We did set out to write this from the very beginning, because initially I proposed to Tristan that we approach this as a devised theatre piece. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, essentially what that means is you get the actors and the performers to take agency and autonomy over the development of their own characters and any scene work that comes out of that. This is very much aligned with my personal training, and it seems like a very organic and natural fit to creating a show that is mostly spatial. Now, we started out with a few workshops, and we wanted to discover its main narrative focal points. We realized pretty quickly that we wanted to play with the concept of time, which is a very, again, natural fit with an immersive theatre landscape, because what is time in a three-dimensional journey? We wanted to play with a middle focal point, or a middle journey during the show, and a big grand finale. In this journey, we had 12 characters that each had their own emotional transformative response to the magnitude of the world around them. When we had this process in mind, it was very fun to play these short scenes, but how you pitch a show to investors and to Tristan and his co-founders, that doesn't quite exist yet. So along comes Scenario, a really good United States-based production company that offered to write that script that you've just seen. And in that script we had 36 hours of content for every character. And we had offers and proposals for audience engagement, utilizing the unique strengths of each performer that we were about to cast. However, when we ensued this much more structured and organized rehearsal period, we also had to deal with COVID. And one of the many great benefits of trying to devise a show during COVID is that at some point you have to shut down. We had to shut down on the day of our first opening night, which was a journey, let's say, but that allowed us to take stock and really reflect on the things that worked and didn't work. One of those things, which is very clear quite early on, was the opening of the show. Now on the right here you'll see 12 actors standing behind representations of hotel rooms, so doorways. This was a hotel, and the idea here was that these actors would, in character, welcome audience members and onboard them, and then bring them into the space of the world. Now, while this sounded like a really beautiful idea, it was also a bit of a logistical nightmare.
Let me explain. What happened here is that little groups of people, a group of 5 or 6 people, were standing on the other side of this doorway. And they were invited into the world by an actor, a character. And they would literally take them into the world, into their home space, because each of the characters had their own home space in the bigger space. And then they would have some kind of an introductory scene, and then they'd be pushed into the large space. And the actors, the characters, would go back into this space to pick up the next wave of people. Therefore, there was a kind of a half-hour period in the beginning of the show with very little dramatic development. We thought that was great, because people could have a half an hour to kind of figure out how the world worked and how the interactive installations worked and enjoy the scenery, but they didn't. They were bored and lost. So we definitely needed to do something there. So it was a tiny little bit of a blessing in disguise that we had to close literally the night before the premiere. And so we set out to completely redesign this.
So then our director Kelly came up with a really great idea to use one of the scenes that was written in the script that only 10 people actually discovered every night, and take that into the entire opening for everyone. And this served as a bit of an explainer, and we used some shadow play, puppetry, and some choreography with a really beautifully voiceover, telling the story from beginning to end to the entire audience so that they knew what they were going to get into.
Yeah, so we started with a devised kind of improvisational attitude towards the dramatic development. Then we switched completely into this written out script that showed for each character the 3 hours of their entire journey. And then, at this stopping point, we kind of came back to the original improvised way of work.
Now, this devised method of rehearsing allowed performers, again, to discover things every single night by virtue of their engagement with the audience members. So moments like these, when our actor Adrian had an audience member, he invited them into a car that we had on the set, and he performed a really beautiful monologue in that car from then on out. Now, you don't discover those moments if you stick to a script. So in conclusion, I just want to offer, do love your script, write your script. It serves as a really nice skeleton, but date it, romance it, give it some roses, just don't marry it.
All right, so tech. We were in a 4,000 square meter space, really, really big. We had, I would say, 300 light fittings and about 80 sets of speakers with different music, different light in every setting. So with my background from escape rooms, we actually created this entire tech flow to be fully automated. We had one technician in the show, 400 or 300 people audience, 12 actors, but just one technician. He wasn't actually working on the sound or light in real time. This was all just a big bang. That sounds very inflexible, and inflexibility is something you cannot have in a big production like this. So what we did is we created this grid.
And in this grid, we had blocks of each taking place 10 minutes. Now, because this was a 3-hour show, that meant we had 18 scenes of 10 minutes. And at the beginning of each block, we then had a sound cue, which was very specific in the context of each character, that would tell these performers where they needed to be, in what space, at what time. We gave every performer a watch as well, so that they could look at what 10-minute block they were if they ever got lost in this space.
Yeah, just to clarify, so there was a soundscape in every space, and in this space, for instance, the actual bell sound of every 10-minute block was a car horn. So none of the audience members noticed anything weird about the soundtrack, but the performer knew where they were. So at the end of every night, especially during tryouts, we'd sit down and write down all our tech notes. We'd want music changed in this scene, that scene, lighting changed, all of that. We would send all those changes to our technicians remotely, and they'd fix it and load it up for the next day, and we'd have a revised show the very next day. This is something that I think did work very well in our way of handling that system, that I would recommend for everyone to try and do. Build a modular system like a Lego conveyor belt, where you can take out a piece, give it to somebody to fix it, and put it back in. Oh, sorry. Yes, the audience is always right. You know this. We all have a love-hate relationship with audience members in many different ways. Whether you're from escape rooms, VR, hotel, you will all know what I'm talking about in one way or another. But obviously there's some truth in this. Our audience members had a challenge. Let's put it in two different ways. Yesterday night we were talking to some French colleagues of ours, and they explained that for them as well, in an immersive show, audience members don't know what to do. And they come into the show and they might get very passive. They might be like, what am I supposed to do? What is happening? Where can I do something? We had two problems simultaneously. We had that passive problem, people not knowing what to do, people sitting down and kind of getting stuck. But we also had another problem, which is in the Netherlands, the escape room scene is very vivid. So we had some very enthusiastic escape room teams and fans come into our experience, our beautiful, poetic, dreamy, unclear, vague experience. And they would come in and they would almost literally be running around looking for clues, for things to solve. At some point, I was in the room incognito, they didn't know I was part of the organization, and somebody came up to me and they said, I think I have it figured out. So I said, okay, well, tell me. And they pointed at a character and they said, I think we have to murder her. And I said, I don't think that's true. Why don't we just continue the journey? And in my mind, I was laughing and crying at the same time. I was like, how are we going to get people to behave differently? So we set out to create a 3-point kind of instruction about how we wanted this behavior to occur, which wasn't entirely clear for us at the beginning. This is a mistake. Make that very clear. For your own team, for the audience, be very clear about how much interaction you want, how little interaction you want, and how you're going to make that clear. Because that is very difficult to do while you're running. We managed to do a bit of that, and let's say the lesson there is make it extremely simple, tell them what to do in 1 or 2 or 3 points, and repeat, repeat, repeat. When they book the first time, when you send them out the reminder email, when they come and actually check into the show, at the very intro of the show, within the script, just try and repeat and repeat and repeat, because the moment the audience doesn't know what they're doing, they can't fully relax, and they can't fully engage, and they can't be transformed. There's a certain amount of pressure there. If you are able to release that, all of a sudden magic starts to occur.
Yeah, behavioral change in the audience doesn't happen overnight. One of the big national newspapers in the Netherlands wrote an article about the show, and it said it was a great show, big spectacle, but it still feels very awkward to stop actors. Now, if this is a big newspaper telling that to Dutch citizens, what are you going to do with that? So we had to find different ways to onboard people, to give people permission to follow performers in a space. And that happened. It did start to happen.
So, in conclusion, because we're getting to an end now, I started by saying I stand here as a broken man, or as a recovered broken man, and there's this feeling when you have an ambitious dream that it's hard to get people on board. You're working with their trust. It's a very sensitive issue. But in the end, it's worth it. That's all I really want to say. Let's keep on making those very big ambitious dreams, the ones where you can fall, and the ones where things can go wrong. Because that's where change happens, and that's where magic can actually occur.
Hotel Wonderland did live in us. It lived through us, and it lived because of all of us. And that's something to be really grateful for. It's something special. That's not just an ethereal dream, a memory. So hopefully this can serve as a bit of inspiration for you to not fear the nightmares that may come to you, but to still dream big, because we need it together.
This was Hotel Wonderland.